I love plants. I love vegetables. There's so much magic in it. Like, it's so amazing to take something that was a tiny seed and turn it into a plant in a few months that you can eat.
Before your 2 seasons ago, this was just a plain patch of farming field.
Yes.
And so the real big story is how you've been able to turn that into something that has created this market garden.
In a world that is experiencing like mass extinction, climate change, I just wanted to be doing something that's like feels worthwhile and is of benefit to people. And a little bit of, I want to show people that this is possible and that we can do things a different way.
Recently, you celebrated being certified organic.
I'm really focusing on growing a healthy, resilient ecosystem and encouraging all that wildlife back into it so that it balances out, so there's predators that will eat the pests.
What does it take to set up and go on this voyage of creating a market garden?
Probably a certain amount of naivety. I think the first thing that I really learned is the value of community and the value of shared meals and being together with people in relationship around food. The resilience of my family and my community is really important to me. And if I have a small patch of land that can grow food and save seed, then that feels like a really valuable thing to be investing in. I'm not very good at sitting on a chair. Anyway.
That is the gardening life. That you're always on your feet?
Yes, yeah, or squatting. I've got very big calves just from squatting. Yeah.
It's quite a workout.
Yeah.
I should explain where we are first. We are doing a recording kind of semi-outside.
Yes.
Inside your polytunnel.
Yeah.
Which has got, well, it's quite a warm, sunny day today, so we've had to open up the sides and the doors to let the cool breeze in. It's cool outside, but it's warm in the polytunnel.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we want at this time of year, because I'm trying to kind of get plants going ahead of the warm weather so that they're kind of ready to go in the ground when the weather's good. So, yeah.
Yeah, much akin to a gardener's greenhouse.
Yes.
But on a much bigger scale.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a tiny scale compared to most other growers that I know. So, yeah. We start small and then we grow.
But more than enough work for you.
More than enough. Yeah. Far more than enough. Yes. I think if I could double myself, that would be very useful.
Mm-hmm. I've seen, I mean, I've walked around your land this morning and I've seen that it's quite an expanse. You've got 3 to 4 acres here.
Yeah. Yeah.
For one person on their own, that's more than enough to handle.
Yes. I think there's like an old saying, 3 acres and a cow, which was, I can't remember when that was from, but it was kind of suggested that would be the right amount to feed a family if they were growing everything themselves.
Right.
But yes, 3 acres on my own, especially because I'm doing it mostly with hand tools. I haven't mechanized very much at all. That's quite a lot. But I actually haven't ended up doing it alone. I think I started it out on my own, but very quickly my family got involved. My dad comes and strims at the weekends occasionally. My sister helped me out in the first year, just because she'd happened to want a career change. So she just took 6 months to help out. I've now got staff. I pay someone for 3 days a week in the season. So yeah, and then I have community days. I bring people here. I have volunteers. So yeah, it's definitely, I wouldn't want to be doing it on my own. But I do like the days when I am here on my own.
Yeah, it seems like you have a nice balance between getting away and having some space.
Yeah.
You certainly have enough space here to do some, jobs which can take your mind off the bigger picture of the world.
Yeah.
Today, this morning, you were picking. What did you say? You take the sprouted.
Yeah, so I call it pricking out.
Pricking, yeah, sorry, that's the one, yeah.
Or potting on. So my chilies and aubergines, I was just transferring them into bigger pots.
It's one of the many steps in taking a seed to plant.
Yeah,
to yield.
Yes. Yeah. It's a step you wouldn't take for most things, but for peppers and aubergines, our season isn't long enough. So you start them early, January, February, in a warm place. In my case, that's my windowsill at home, and just in a really small space. And then as they grow, I transfer them to bigger pots so that they can grow on a bit more before they go out in the polytunnel, because then they'll have more warmth for longer. So then you can get fruit from them. But you can grow them outside, but you wouldn't get a lot from them. So trying to do it commercially, it's really helpful to have the indoor space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we should explain the full picture of where we are.
Yeah.
You're a Sweetpea Market Garden.
I am.
Based in Cambridgeshire.
Yes.
It's a fairly new venture, just a few years old.
Yeah. I've done 2 seasons.
Yeah.
So going into my 3rd now. But yeah, it feels like, I've been growing for a lot longer. So.
Yeah, we'll come to your story of everything that you've kind of learned along the way in your life to kind of lead into this moment. But at this very place that we're sitting to now, yes, there's 2 fairly big polytunnels, and there's lots of plantations out there. There's lots of plantations in here. There's lots of seedlings growing in here.
Yeah.
But before your 2 seasons ago, this was just a plain patch of farming field.
Yes. Yeah.
Arable land, you'd call it.
Yeah.
And so the real big story is how you've been able to turn that into something that has created this market garden, which is really spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something I don't think I really understood the kind of just the scale of it in terms of how many things I'd have to accumulate to make it happen, all the infrastructure and everything like that. I've still got a really long way to go to feel fully comfortable working on the site. Like, we're still adapting to the weather and things like that a lot, but that's all part of the fun as well. It's nice to have the challenge and to figure it out as we go along, and try and be thrifty out of necessity, but also just wanting to be resourceful and make use of things that already exist rather than bring new things into the world and things like that. So I have managed to acquire a lot of things secondhand, which has been really useful.
Well, the heart of your story is about someone who has taken to learning little bits of gardening knowledge along the way from having adventures exploring the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Through working on farms across different countries, different climates, different practices, I imagine, as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And learning about the importance of farming and community and food and organic food, and wanting to bring something like that back home to where you were originally from, Cambridgeshire. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I left thinking I wouldn't come back. I had a great childhood. I enjoyed growing up in Cambridgeshire. It's very flat, which can be a bit uninspiring. And also it's all, we always lived on the edge of the village. So I was always surrounded by fields and the outdoors. And I do love the fens. But there aren't many trees and there aren't many hills. And I kind of thought it was more exciting to be somewhere else. And I love the perspective that the hills give you. I love that you go out for a walk, and because you're elevated, you're seeing different things. I feel like that's quite expansive for your mind as well and how you think. So I think I gained a lot from going away. But equally, I learned that community is really important to me and family is really important to me. And so I wanted to come back so that I could really work on, build that and work on those, cultivate those relationships. Because that to me is how I can be resilient in the world.
Well, you left the UK to go exploring the world on your bike.
Yes. Actually, the first time I left the UK to go exploring on my bike. I cycled to Kenya from Cambridge when I was 19 as part of a group trip. And that's, apart from a few family holidays where we cycled around the Western Isles and Cornwall and things like that, that was the first kind of big cycling adventure that I did, which I loved. It was 6 months, all wild camping. And then when I had got later on in life, after having got fed up of kind of where I'd ended up, I was working in a cafe and very overworked and not particularly well paid. And I just was like, no, I've always wanted to go on another cycle tour, and I wanted to go on my own, because the last one I'd done was with a group of people. I was quite young. I was definitely the child of the group. And I feel like they carried me through quite a lot. So I wanted to see what it was like going on my own. So I went to New Zealand, basically, because I'd heard that it's a great place to cycle, and lots of people go there. Bought a couple of books that are like guides how to cycle around New Zealand, and just left. I think I bought a bike a week before I left, because I was thinking I'd get one out there, but then I realised actually all of the bikes out there are imported and much more expensive anyway. So I was like, oh, I should just take one with me. But I didn't love mine. So yeah, and then I actually just didn't have an itinerary. I just figured it out as I went. And then started picking up woofing places. So
so what's a woofing?
So it's actually got 2 W's in it. It stands for Willing Workers on Organic Farms. Similar to Workaway, or there are other kind of travel exchange organisations. But this one is specifically about being on organic farms.
Has the name changed? Because I've got Worldwide Opportunities.
Oh, there you go. Maybe I'm wrong.
whether it's been rebranded.
It could have been
Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. Either way.
I mean, I may have just made that up, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's a different website for each country, so you actually have to like register in each country. There's not, when I did it actually, which was a few years ago, so it might have changed. If you were traveling many countries, you would have to kind of buy membership in each country. But yeah, so the arrangement is that farmers list their farm on this website and they say what they have available. And it's a work exchange, so you get accommodation and usually food, like your meals provided, and then you work a set number of hours a day in exchange for that. It's also really supposed to be about education and learning and sharing knowledge. That's a really like core fundamental part of Wwoofing. And I think that works to varying degrees depending on where you go and whether people kind of see it as a more affordable way of getting the work done, or as a way of really sharing knowledge and community and all of the ideas around organic growing. That that knowledge is really hard to come by in other ways apart from peer-to-peer learning. That's kind of the way that it's mostly been done.
There's no better way to learn farming than by being on the farm.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Their website says, contrary to popular belief, woofing is not volunteer labour for accommodation and a holiday. A woofer should have a genuine interest in agroecology or ecological farming practices to learn about the host's work and to share in their lifestyle. Likewise, the hosts must express a sincere desire to share their expertise in organic farming. Yeah. Accommodation merely becomes a means for an educational approach in teaching and learning about a more sustainable way of life.
Yeah. And that's definitely how I got into it and why I wanted to do it. I remember agonizing over the emails I would write to farms being like, I just need to prove to you that I am interested. And I think it really depends. Like my first place was a macadamia nut farm, and they had sheep as well that grazed underneath the trees. And they needed between 6 and 8 woofers at any given time during the macadamia harvest season, just to get the work done, because it was really, we would climb the trees with bamboo canes, which they'd found were the best tools for the job, and literally hit the tree branches to knock the nuts out. And then we go along and rake them all up. And it was amazing. Like, he developed all these tools for how to process them. He had to dehydrate them for 6 weeks before he could crack them. And there was all this stuff, and I loved it. I learned so much. And there were definitely people there who were only there because they were traveling and they needed a place to stay, because their model depended on that labor, because they couldn't afford to pay people. Even though macadamia nuts are really expensive, it was so labor intensive that they had to have this workforce. So it was an interesting one. I got loads out of it. I learned how to ride a horse because the farmer there taught me. So it was amazing. And there was one guy I remember who spent the whole time we were working with his top off and in these tiny shorts because he was trying to get a tan. He had these little pink shorts, and he was like strolling around with a bamboo cane, and not working very hard at all. And that's just kind of the nature of it. But it did make me think, like, is this a sustainable model if people are having to work, if you're having to not pay your labor in order to make it economically viable? Then that's an interesting question.
Farming across the board and linking it back here to your venture that you're doing here and the future of that. Yeah.
So actually, so far, I haven't paid myself. I actually paid myself for last month. So that's quite feels like a big achievement. I am paying the people I have working for me.
It's a long time to go without salary.
2 years, yeah, definitely. And I can only do it because I have family support. So I moved in with my sister before I started this. She lived about half an hour away in Huntingdon at the time. I didn't pay rent for a year and a half. And I worked in a cafe over the winter and 1 day a week last season as well, just to keep some money coming in. There are things like the farm pays for my fuel and car costs and things like that. So it's not like I'm not taking any, I mean, I need the car for the business, but in some ways it's a decision I've made, especially in the second year. I could have taken some money out of what I call the business. I am a sole trader, so technically it's all my money. But I have a separate business account that it all exists in. But I also need to invest. I need seed money to get this big enough to make it viable to pay myself. So I made the decision to not pay myself in order to buy another polytunnel and get a cold store and get netting and all of the things that are kind of essential to make it viable. But you talk to anyone who's growing at this scale, there are people who've been doing it for 10 years who still aren't paying themselves minimum wage. So that's a bit scary. There are people who are making it work by doing something else alongside it. So whether it's education or running a campsite or running a farm shop or, workshops, like things like that. And I have lots of ideas of how I can maybe diversify a bit. But I do think it's sad that we can't support the people who are growing the food that we need to be alive. So it's an interesting one because there's a scale thing, right? Like the reason that food is so cheap is because of industrial agriculture, because we've managed to scale it to the point that we can produce huge amounts of food with relatively low costs, although those costs are rising and rising with the increasing costs of fertilizers and the chemical inputs and big machinery that need a lot of these complicated machines that have electronic elements and are difficult to fix and all of that stuff. Like, it's very expensive. Farming has been subsidized by the government since the war and since the post Second World Wars. So, and the EU as well, because they wanted to resolve the food scarcity issue. So it's all very complicated, the kind of the value of food and the cost of food, which are different things.
Mm-hmm. And once you start subsidizing something, it's very hard to take that away.
Yes.
Especially when it goes down with feeding a population.
Yeah.
Who are also voters.
Yes. Yeah. And there's questions about what gets subsidized, because are we subsidizing the production of sugars and oils and very fatty things that then make the food that we eat have led to the heavily processed food industry.
High calorie, low nutrition stuff.
Yeah. And that's all funded by subsidies. I mean, it's also all changing at the moment, which is we're in a very interesting era in terms of British farming, because we've left the EU and we're moving away from their subsidy schemes, although theirs are changing at the moment as well. Farmers are now going to get paid for their environmental services that they do, rather than just paid for the amount of land that they've got in production. But none of that benefits me, because I'm actually smaller than the minimum land size to get any money from the government for what I'm doing. That might be changing.
Is there any benefit from your site being on the site of a much bigger farm and having a landowner and a farmer that has wanting to put you on his site and encourage what you're doing and encourage some more kind of agroecology type things that bring back nature?
Already I've had huge benefits from it, because he's put in the rabbit-proof fence.
So let's explain first of all, how you got this site, because because we are on a macro scale. This is a big farm that we're on.
Yes. Yeah.
Fields and fields and fields and fields. This is a very farm heartland of kind of UK, really. This kind of area of Cambridgeshire. There's not much other than farming fields around here.
Yeah.
You've been given a very sliced bit off one of the field, corner edge type thing.
Yeah. So it's big for me. It's about 3 acres. But actually the way that the farmer Tom described it was kind of the least useful section of the field for him. He said that the crops would grow taller. So he was like, I think it's very fertile, or he knows it's very fertile. But actually the fact that things were growing taller meant that it was annoying for him to combine. So that's part of the reason that he chose this kind of edge piece of field for me, that apparently was an ancient meadow at one point. So the way I found this land was I was working in Sussex on farms and knew I wanted to come back to this area, but hadn't found any jobs or things around here. And so I was volunteering online at the Oxford Real Farming Conference, it happens at the same time as the Oxford Farming Conference. But it was set up in direct opposition to how the conversations that were happening at the Oxford Farming Conference at the time.
Okay, bit of a political kind of...
The Oxford Farming Conference was very mainstream industrial agriculture. The Oxford Real Farming Conference was the organic farmers and the agroecological farmers, and they just set up in the town hall in Oxford.
Real clever use of the term "real" there.
Yes,
just to dig it in a little bit.
Yeah,
no pun intended.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we call industrial farming conventional farming, but we've only been doing it for 100 years or less. So it's not the convention. It became the convention really rapidly. But humans have been like farming and cultivating land and growing things for almost our entire existence. It has become the mainstream. And the people who set up the Oxford Real Farming Conference just wanted to show that there was another way and look to those older traditional ways of farming, while also looking at all of the scientific knowledge that we've gained since then, and combine those in a way that shows that we can grow food without being relying on synthetic inputs and big machinery and damaging the environment. So yes, anyway, the Oxford, I was volunteering online because it was all online. It was during COVID. And they set up a notice board because they have gone in person when they do the in-person conferences. And so I just posted on the notice board saying, I'm looking for land or opportunities in East Anglia. I was prepared to go as wide as 3 counties around where I grew up. The Tom replied, and he was the only person who replied to my message, but he said, I've got this farm in Cambridgeshire, not that far from where I grew up. We're the other side of Cambridge. And he's really keen. He's, because he's a big arable farmer, he also comes from a public health background. He was a GP, or actually he still is a GP. He's on sabbatical at the moment.
The practicing GP that's also a farmer.
Yeah.
on a land of this size as well.
Yeah. So technically this farm only just qualifies size-wise to warrant having 2 people working here full-time. Only just, I think. It's debatable whether they really should have two full-time employees on the farm. They bring other people in the season. But yeah, the scale of it compared to the amount of people actually on the land is just incredible. But yeah, because he comes from this public health background, he really cares about nutrition and people's well-being, and wants to connect with the local community about where their food comes from, because he's growing food. And he sees the market garden as a way of bridging that gap, because there's more of a direct connection with vegetables than there is with wheat, for example, because you see a field of wheat, it takes a few steps before that turns into the flour that you're eating.
And that's blended with other forms of wheat from different farms.
Yeah.
And the flour that we get is
yeah. So actually it's sweet, because he does school visits with local schools, and they all come and they go in the barn, which is the grain store, and they all go and look at the wheat, and then he says, this goes into your Weetabix, because he sells to Weetabix, and they get little hand mills out and they grind it and things like that. So there's a certain amount he can show people, but I think he was like, a market garden has lots more to see. But also because the reason it benefits him is that I'm creating direct relationships with the local community as customers. And so in the future, I think he hopes that he'll be able to sell some of his grains and the apples from the agroforestry through my business as well. So we can kind of collaborate on that. So it's mutually beneficial. But circling back to your original question, I benefit from him, from his scale, because he has access to funding and grants and things like that. So he's put in 3 ponds as part of the market garden, and he got a grant for those as like a wildlife kind of thing.
Any environmentalist or kind of farmer will see that a pond can just bring in so much nature.
Yeah.
Which you require, and it's just a water source as well for some.
Yeah. So we've got geese at the moment and ducks. The ponds have been there for a year now. Maybe?
And because you put the ponds in, you showed me them earlier, and you have an idea that you want to plant some reeds that will filter the water, but actually we saw that there were reeds growing there today, so grasses that had been brought in probably from ducks, from their waste, or from carrying seeds on their on their person. And we found a great crested newt the other day, which is a rare form of newt, rare species of newt. I get mixed up. I call animals by plant names, so I called them a variety of newt the other day. So the plants are so infused in my way of being. But it's a great example of how you have to do a little bit of work of like creating that pond, but then once it's there, nature then fills in the rest for you.
Yeah. And that's the advice of the Wildlife Trust, is you leave it and let it just develop whatever plants come. I think they say there's a lot of value in the biology of the initial successional stage, but I am really excited about having the ponds, because I'm using agroecological practices. So my approach to growing food is that I'm really focusing on growing a healthy, resilient environment, ecosystem. I'm nurturing an ecosystem and encouraging all that wildlife back into it so that it balances out. So there are predators that will eat the pests. So the ponds will bring in amphibians, they'll bring in frogs that will eat slugs, and the newts as well. And ducks eat slugs too. But we'll also have dragonflies, and it just is I see it as quite an integral part of the whole ecosystem. And at the moment, I'm trying to work out how I can then create kind of nature corridors that will draw those animals out from the ponds and into the rest of the land, so that it kind of functions a bit better.
Yeah. This really does highlight the importance of everyone's responsibility to look after their own little patch of land, even if it's just their backyard. Because I've talked about your plot being on a macro scale, just being engulfed by all these arable fields, which are, I guess, just like 1 or 2 forms of crops that have been done on a mass scale. So there's not a lot of diversity there. Nature isn't really kind of in play with the fields there, because it's just a system that produces one type of crop and that's it. What you have here is a complete diversity of crops. You're integrating nature with the ponds. You're letting nature come in, that in turn can help, like you say, feed the pests. But it's interesting to see that has been done regardless of what's surrounding you.
Yeah.
That even though you've got this, on a macro level, this tiny little strip of land that's surrounded by kind of, I guess, a desert type of land that's just really for one type of food, one type of crop. But even regardless of that, it's amazing how much nature can come into just a little portion like you've got here.
Yeah, and I've seen really big changes just in the few years that I've been here. I don't remember seeing any beetles in the first year, and now I'll dig up a grass and they're all underneath it. And I think I probably have a bit of a stressful approach to a lot of people in how I am managing the land, because I do let the weeds grow. I try and get rid of the ones that are going to be really problematic, but generally I'm really happy just to have roots in the ground, and these tussocky grasses are just perfect for the beetles. And that's actually, beetles was my first connection to farming, because when I was at university, my dissertation was on how beetle populations in comparing organic to conventional wheat fields. So I had a very direct experience of the comparison, not, to be honest, between the beetle populations. I didn't find a massive difference, but between how the land was throughout that growing season. The organic wheat had clover growing underneath it, which is actually a practice that Tom uses on the farm here. So he's not completely monocrop. He is integrating other species in his fields. But that the soil there stayed looking like soil the whole year. And the soil in the conventional wheat field just cracked open and was dry and like arid. And it was amazing to me that this wheat was actually growing in it, because it just felt like a desert. And actually Cambridgeshire gets apparently less rainfall on average than the Sahara Desert. So this area really needs roots in the ground, because roots help with retaining soil moisture. The soil functions properly when it has roots in it.
Just jumping in briefly to say, if you've got this far, you're probably a fan of the show, and it would be great if you wouldn't mind confirming that love by following or subscribing to this podcast. It takes just one click from you, but it really does make a huge difference in getting more people to find this show. Thank you. I want to take it back to your woofing, back to New Zealand, when you were learning whilst on the job, in some sense, at all these weird and wonderful organic farms across that country. What were the main things you really learned from that experience that you feel like you can bring back to this plot here?
I think the first thing that I really learned, and I've been reflecting on it a lot this year, is the value of community, and the value of shared meals, and being together with people in relationship around food. So I remember that a lot, because I would go to not just farms, some permaculture projects, and community gardens.
So what's a permaculture project?
So a permaculture place would kind of invite people to come and connect with the space, and they might have, like, we would live in tents or outdoor places, and they'd have compost toilets, and just be looking at how you can live in a more circular way, like reuse your waste and things like that. And then they would invite people to come and live like that and experience it and teach the things that they've learned along the way. Had a very weird experience at that place where they'd got a whole lorry load of fish from a local fishing competition, and we had to create raised vegetable beds by layering fish with compost.
Oh, bizarre.
But the fish had been left out in the sun for 3 days, so it was the worst job to get a bunch of volunteers to do. But yeah, that's kind of a weird example of utilising an abundant resource, because these fish were invasive, and that's why they had the fishing competition.
Right.
And using it to create very nutrient-rich soil that will grow very healthy plants. I don't know how good that was, but people have all sorts of kind of ideas about how to do it.
Well, it is a great example of that circular system of here is a problem in our life, and how can we use that problem to benefit some other area of the world.
Yeah, definitely. And how can we see things as a resource rather than as a waste to throw away? And then community gardens are spaces that are available to the community. They usually have some kind of organising committee, and the land might be owned by the group or might be council land, or sometimes private land that's just been offered for community to use. But the ethos in a community garden is that anyone can come and grow food and be connected to that. And usually they'll share the produce between the people who are there or with the wider community. So this community garden that I was at, that was in Golden Bay, had this earth building that they'd made as a community, and it was all wooden, and then the walls were made from cob, which is like earth mixed with straw, very thick, but just an amazing feeling space. There's a softness in the space that you just don't get in kind of our kind of square box houses that are and then we had a compost toilet, and just everything we ate pretty much was made from things that we grew there. And that just kind of was like otherworldly to me, and felt like I just wanted to bring those things with me. And I still feel like with Sweetpea, I've got a long way to go, because it is my project. And I would love to feel like I had more of a team that I could work with on it. Although I guess there's some question as to whether I could give up the sense of ownership that I have to other people.
You're still in the process of finding a lot of things out though as well.
Yeah.
And that is a personal project for you.
Yeah.
Over the next few years to kind of know the systems that have to be in place year after year, and trying things that may work or may not work.
Yeah.
And understanding to the point where once in, another few seasons time, you can then know exactly how, if someone wants to come in, how you can utilize them to fit in. And but at the moment, I guess so many things are like all over the place, and you're still not quite sure.
Yeah. And so many decisions to make, and just things to work out what to do. I think I envisage in the future people coming in to use the land for their own things. Like Nora, who worked for me last year and is working again this year, is really interested in mushrooms. So we had a little trial of that, and that could be a potential kind of separate area of business that could happen, or cut flowers, or making processing some of the produce that we have. Like in my pipe dream world, I would love to have a farm to table kind of cafe restaurant thing, but I want to be growing the food, so I would love someone else to come in and do that. Like I think there's ways that it could grow, and it already is, so it's small at the moment, and I'm still working out even which markets to focus on, because there's so many possible routes that I could go. So yeah.
Why was it that particularly you wanted to start a market garden? What was deep inside you that had this passion to grow things yourself, and then to feed a community of people?
I think it stems from, I love plants. I love vegetables. I've been vegetarian most of my life. And, I was speaking to my sisters the other day because I just made this meal that was full of vegetables, and we were talking about have 5 a day. And we were like, well, this is more than 5 a day in one meal. It's a love of my life. And then growing plants is there's so much magic in it. Like it's so amazing to take something that was a tiny seed and turn it into a plant in a few months that you can eat. It's kind of like it's unbelievable in a way, because we're not connected to it, or I wasn't connected to it. So I think the kind of There's so many parts of it, but it just makes sense. Like in terms of where I want to place my energy in the world, in a world that is experiencing like mass extinction, climate change, like decreasing life expectancy, like increasing kind of social, economic division. I just wanted to be doing something that's like feels worthwhile and is of benefit to people. And then plants and vegetables is the niche that makes sense for me. So yeah, and a little bit of, I want to show people that this is possible, and that we can do things a different way. Yeah, and with the climate change, mass extinction thing, like the resilience of my family and my community is really important to me. And if I have a small patch of land that can grow food and save seed and weather the world's like potential disasters, then that feels like a really valuable thing to be investing in. Yeah.
What does it take to set up and go on this voyage of creating a market garden?
Probably a certain amount of naivety. I think anyone who starts a big venture or a business or an adventure, extreme sports, anything like that, doesn't necessarily realize the full extent of the thing that they're undertaking. And you kind of get into it and then you just figure it out as you go along. In practical terms, access to land. But actually access to land is hard. But once you have that land, you need knowledge and skills, and you need resources. You need finance or community backing or, a lot of help. A lot of enthusiastic family and friends. And a willingness to like fail, I guess, as well, as with most things. I'm not very good at that, actually. I'm quite a perfectionist and I get very frozen. I get the kind of freeze state where I just can't make decisions. And I'm definitely in a practice of working my way out of that through starting a market garden. I'm much better at this time of year. In the winter, I can't make myself do anything. But that's another reason to run a market garden, is because it's seasonal. I can move with my own energy and not be expected to work 8 hours a day in the winter out on the land because I'm being paid to do a job that is that. I can make my own decisions about, okay, at the moment, I can't really function or leave the house, so I'm not going to push through that. I'm just going to rest now and then go all out when we get back into spring.
It's almost like the seasons are like the changing of the tide, in that you can try and swim against the tide, but it's not going to be very easy, and you're going to put a lot of effort in. But when you wait for the tide to turn, then when you bring the effort and the energy, everything goes with you. And when the sun comes out and everything gets warmer and you get these warmer months, when just nature just starts just flourishing, that's when you grow as a person as well to match that energy to match nature. I don't know if that's specific to me or if all humans have that to some extent. Like maybe I'm a more extreme version of it, but I think it's mad that we're trying to continue to work at the same level. Like we expect the same level of productivity in the winter as we do in the spring or in the summer. I mean, I have the kind of somewhat opposite life to most people I know in the summer, because that's my busiest time and I'm working all the time and I don't have holidays and things like that. Although maybe in the future I'll be able to. Whereas
most people take their time off in the summer. So I guess that's different. But that's another thing I'm trying to work out, is how can I make this place also a place where I rest and have a nice time and socialise. So I'm doing more evening barbecues and things here, so I get to enjoy the space as well as looking at all of the weeds that need to be removed, or plants that need to get in the ground. Or
well, talk about how you've been able to create some balance in your life now that you're 2 seasons in. That you've had a lot of hard work in getting this up and running, and it's still an evolving plot of land. But now you've got the experience behind you, and now you're saying that you're learning to take breaks when there's breaks naturally in the seasons.
I guess for me, that's things like making the decision not to try and sell vegetables in the winter months when it's hard to well, I haven't had a lot of success with the winter vegetables I have tried to grow, but also it's quite a miserable job in January, February, harvesting cold, wet things and then trying to wash them and pack them. It's not enjoyable. And it's also when I'm kind of at my lowest energy wise. So choosing to not work at that time, and I work in a cafe over the winter instead. So I'm indoors, I'm still generating an income, I'm seeing people and having those relationships. And then the other kind of things that I've learned is to invite people here more and have a plan really at the start of the year about what the year looks like in terms of community events and things like that, like volunteer days, so that when we get into June and I really don't want to be asking people to come and help me out, I've already asked, and people already know that that's the opportunity to come and hang out here. I mean, a lot of the big jobs here do get done by a group of people, like the squash planting and things like that. So
it's amazing what a group of people can do.
Yeah.
In comparison to what one person has to do in terms of person hours.
Yeah, and even just 2 people, you're not getting twice as much done. You're getting 3 times as much done just because of the time saved by doing things together, and at the same time. So there's a real strength in having a team. So I'm in the process of trying to hire another person as well to help out with harvest days, which should also hopefully make things a bit easier.
You mentioned that you were working for someone else during lockdown. Were you at another farm? Is that correct? Yeah.
So I moved to Brighton in January to start a job on a farm as a assistant veg box manager. So I was actually doing a lot of the harvesting and packing, and then a few days doing growing.
So during lockdown, there was a huge demand for locally sourced food because supermarkets were very much suffering with supply chain issues, and also people wanting to reconnect with their local area, whether that was just going for a walk or whether supporting local businesses that were struggling in that time. And what did you notice specifically about that point in time as a person, fulfilling veg box orders?
Yes. So our veg box orders went up by 1/3 overnight. So we were doing something like 1,000 veg boxes, and then that went up to 1,700, literally overnight, in our local area. And then we had to stop. We couldn't take on any more because we were still buying in vegetables from other suppliers and they were having supply chain issues. So although we were growing some things, we didn't grow potatoes or carrots or kind of the bigger staple crops. So we had to adapt really fast. We had to, Barkham Nurseries, where I was working, has this quite incredible flexible system where people can have quite a lot of choice, and likes and dislikes and swap things. And we just had to completely get rid of that. We were like, we're really sorry. Even our existing customers, you can't get a choice anymore. You can still have your dislikes because we didn't want to give people things that they really didn't want to eat, but they couldn't swap things. And we had to stop taking any orders. And we also had to stop answering our phone, because I did one day of answering the phone and people were calling us up absolutely desperate to get a veg box delivered. And it was obviously really hard because you don't want to let people down. The whole point of doing this work is we want to feed people. We want to feed people locally grown food.
And many people were shielding, and you were offering a service that directly gave them access to food so that on their doorstep.
Exactly, yeah. And that's why there's that anyone who's been developing a veg box company is doing really important work, because those businesses thrived during lockdown and were essential to people. And what's slightly like upsetting about it is that people didn't necessarily stay on after lockdown had finished. So while they really benefited from this service during lockdown, they then wanted to go back to having more choice and flexibility that the supermarkets offer, which is understandable. But it's also kind of difficult as a veg box business when you are dependent on customers to actually make your business work, to feel like you're doing a public service, but it's not rewarded in that way, and not supported by people like in that. And yeah, I think that's kind of a heavy thing. And I think I don't really like to dwell on that too much, because I actually think that food growing places like mine can be a real sign of like the positive reasons to support local food, and like the connection and the all the like great benefits that you get from eating local, like much fresher food and much more nutrient dense, like food that's not sprayed with chemicals and all of those things. But Barkham's been going for 30 years and they've like almost closed down a couple of times. And it's a very difficult industry to be in.
What did that moment in lockdown really highlight about the food insecurity we have in supermarkets and the problem really that we have with our supply chains?
I guess what lockdown highlighted was that we are very dependent on imports in this country. And actually we've seen that more recently with the war in Ukraine, that like the price of certain things has really skyrocketed, and our ability to get sunflower oil and things like that has shifted. I guess it also highlights that our infrastructure is not great in terms of like how connected up things are, and how much exists to kind of facilitate getting food from a place to another, like to the shops and to people, because it's not always that there wasn't the food, it was that there was an issue getting the food to people. And also what happened in lockdown is loads and loads of like community kitchens and food hubs and things were set up because of this scarcity and because of people losing their livelihoods and not being able to access food, which is all grassroots and people kind of supporting other people and making use of supermarket kind of wastage and things like that. So Yeah, but we import 80% of our fruit in this country and 50% of it's like 40% of our vegetables. And we definitely don't need to be doing that. There's a lot that we can grow here. But the land that we have in production for horticulture has like dropped by 20% in the last 30 years. We're not increasing that at all.
So what you're saying is there needs to be more market gardens.
I would love for there to be a market garden in every village. In fact, probably more than one. Like, if you think a market garden my size would probably feed 100 families, if those families are eating a vegetable-centered diet, which I was reading in a report the other day that the average family spends less than £5 on vegetables a week.
And that figure as well really highlights why some people don't see any value in buying from market gardens because of the price.
Yeah.
Because if they're only used to just cheap veg and getting it very occasionally, then why should they spend a lot more on their veg at a market garden without the convenience?
Yeah, yeah. And that's a difficult one to kind of get around. I think I'm only going to connect as a business with the people who really are already concerned about their environmental impact and like have some connection to where their food comes from and things like that, and have a certain amount of disposable income as well and comfort in life, right? Because in the inequality in our society is big, and the cost of living is obviously a problem at the moment. Like, I can't afford rent in my area, which is in part because it's hard to make money from selling vegetables because of the value of vegetables. Like, when the supermarkets kind of see it as a draw, so they will sell a kilo of carrots for 17p or something like that around like holidays, like Easter. Like, they'll do this big price reduction in veg as a kind of draw so that they can sell people chocolate. And they're making a loss on that, and the farmer's making almost no money on that.
I saw, it was actually last night, I saw an advertisement on national TV, Saturday night, big popular show, and it was a big supermarket, and they had advertised that you could cook this bolognese with their super cheap spaghetti, and I think the cost of the spaghetti was like 29 pence for this bag of spaghetti. Yeah. And so the whole advert was basically advertising that they sold spaghetti for 29p. When you think of it, like, where do you see adverts that would push a product that's only 29 pence when it's on national Saturday night TV? Okay, it's an advert for their supermarket. Yeah. And it's that draw to get you in. Yeah, yeah. Because they know, oh, great, that's going to be that price, so I can go and buy the rest of my shopping there. Yeah. How does someone like you compete against these huge giants? Yeah, well, we can't. But it's heartbreaking because it shouldn't be that cheap. No. And I understand why it should be, to some extent, to feed the nation as cheaply as possible. But is that really the true price of that? No, there's not including all the subsidies that go into producing that. And I think it's actually, I think the UK is one of the worst for the values that we place on food. One of the core values that we place on food in the UK is its cheapness. I don't think, from talking to people from other countries, that there's anywhere near as much emphasis put on always the race to the bottom price-wise, but which is perpetuated by the supermarkets, but it does seem to be a little bit in the kind of zeitgeist of the country that food should be cheap. And I don't remember when it was, but we used to spend at least 50% of our income on food, and that's gone down to around 10% now.
Yeah, and that's like, I think it was only 100 years ago, or it's not that long.
The days of the old markets, when you would just be buying directly from what was outside on your street.
Yeah, and most people would be growing their own food as well, right? So like not only were they producing their own food, they were also spending that much of their like kind of living expenses on food as well. Whereas now, obviously, all of the other costs we have in life are higher, potentially. But we're also kind of funneled into this kind of consumerist, must buy new kind of like, you know, get like technology's always improving. We always need the next new iPad or whatever, new clothes, like everything doesn't last as long as it used to. Like, yeah.
There's not the kind of repair kind of culture that we used to have when we'd have to kind of, repair our clothes at home.
Yeah.
Now there's a big kind of fashion push. Your journey at this market garden has taken you to develop your own veg boxes, which I don't know, was that something that you envisioned at the time when you first started growing stuff, or was that just something that's kind of falling into place as a result of having this garden here?
I didn't love veg boxes. It felt like quite a logistical nightmare when I worked at Barkham. And then I went on to work at a CSA called Peapod in Sussex as well. And they did 130 veg boxes a week. And it was always very stressful, having enough variety and enough interest and, not giving people courgettes every week, things like that. So I wasn't sure that was what I wanted to do. And I decided to do markets because I loved the farmers market that we did at Pakaraka, which is where I trained in New Zealand. I did like a 1/4 acre market garden intensive 3-month traineeship. And their model was selling at markets. So I thought I'd try that here. Where I am is actually central between 3 historic market towns. So Cambridge, St Neots and St Ives are all within 10 miles. So I thought, perfect, like I'll go to those markets. But what I found was that I couldn't actually get into most of the markets. The Cambridge one, they gave me a Wednesday and I was round the back of the market. So there wasn't a lot of passing trade. The St Ives one, there was another grower there who kind of had a list of things that I couldn't take to the market. So I could still go, and we did trade there in our first year and it was quite good. But it came with restrictions. And then St Neots was full. And then last year I did quite a lot of community markets. And basically I've just found that that's not the model. That's not how people are shopping and relating to local food in this area. And so I'm keeping up the ones that work really well. But actually what happened last year was, in our first year after the Cambridge market on a Wednesday, we would have lots left over that we hadn't sold. And this was me and my sister at the time. And we had both worked at this solar panel company, solar like distributor. And so we would turn up at the office at the end of the market and sell their staff whatever we had left over. And they enjoyed that. And so the owners of the company decided to approach me to supply a veg bag to their staff.
It's like a company benefit.
Yeah. So
every
initially,
employee has access to a veg box if they want one.
Yeah. I think initially they thought they would get the staff to pay and it would just be they kind of facilitated me being there. But actually what they landed on was they said, we'll buy everyone who wants one a veg bag from you. And it's like a perk that the staff get. And I deliver them once a week. I ended up having to buy things in because it was such a jump in scale that there was no way that I was growing enough. You know, they wanted to start in a few weeks' time, and vegetables take minimum 6 weeks to grow, if not like 8 months, depending on what they are. So I did buy in and I'm doing my best to get things as local as possible.
So you're going to other suppliers, locally sourced kind of growers?
Yeah, other growers locally, and even kind of around the UK as well. But sticking with organic, because that feels really like that's one of my kind of core values, is that the vegetables are grown without chemicals, in a way that's better for the natural world. So yeah, sticking with that. But it's been amazing, because some of the people who work there are graduates who've just left university and are on the grad scheme, and someone described it to me as they hadn't seen a vegetable in years. And now they're getting this weekly bag of vegetables that's free, so they want to take it. And then they have to figure out what to do with it. And it creates conversations in the workplace, which are really, it's such an interesting kind of result of that, which I guess I'd considered it, and I did suggest we set up a WhatsApp group so that I could share recipes and people could kind of share them between them. So I anticipated there being some interest in that, but I don't think I'd quite realised that actually it's such a connective thing, like that anyone who's getting that veg bag can talk about what do we do with this kohlrabi and kind of have a conversation about that. That's not work.
That's bringing a community within the workplace as well. And because it's a perk for them, and it's an exciting part of their week, knowing that they're going to open a box, not entirely knowing what's inside as well, because it's going to change every week. Yes,
and so far I've maintained the element of surprise. I don't really want to tell them what they're going to get, because that was when I was at university, I got a veg box, and that was one of my favourite things. It was like getting a present every week that I didn't know what was in it, and then I'd have to figure out what I was going to do with it. And I've always been enough of a kind of throw it in a pan and see cook that I really enjoyed that. I answered someone in the company did message me today to ask what was in their bag for meal planning purposes. So I haven't quite managed to maintain that. But yeah, it's a really great thing. So then I'm continuing that this year, and I'm hoping to also offer veg bags to local people locally as well. Initially for them to come and collect here. But in my long-term vision, I'd like to deliver to the closest villages by cargo bike. Because I also have a relationship with the cargo bike company in Cambridge. So because they were the people who organised the cycling to Kenya. So it's all connected.
It's all about bringing back these connections. Yeah, all about community, and realising that you don't have to rely on the conveniences of these big stores, that actually you can connect communities yourselves and create these distribution chains through your own network.
Yeah,
that can help suppliers like you reach different areas of the local area.
Yeah. So that's the veg bag is definitely one of my favourite routes to market now, which is interesting.
Is that the best way to support a local grower? Is if they offer?
Yeah,
because not everyone can go to a farmer's market, because you typically can be on a weekend and people can be doing other things. And so where do you get or is it supporting them from a local shop, grocery shop?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's supporting them in whatever that way they are selling their produce, because everyone's doing it slightly differently. I also actually received just a donation from someone last year who donated £200 a month because she'd gone a year without buying new clothes, and that was the money she'd saved for that year. And so she decided to donate it to local food producers, and she was pointed in my direction by Cambridge Organic, who are the local veg box company. So I'm going to be supplying them. I think just generally like connecting with this world of organic, local producers, even just like getting involved with your local community garden, or like as soon as you start in this kind of route of being more connected to where your food comes from, then you are kind of supporting and facilitating this world to exist, because we're very dependent, but also like benefit from being a really tight kind of connected world. And so I'm a member of the Land Workers Alliance, which is kind of a bit like a union for farmers. So they advocate for small-scale agroecological farmers. They work on policy, but we also have like meetups, and we go and visit each other's farms, and we share resources and things like that. So like going along and volunteering, there's all sorts of ways that you can be connected.
Just recently you celebrated being certified organic.
Yes.
2-year process. Tell me what has gone into building up to that for you to be certified organic.
So in order to be certified, I had to be growing to organic standards for 2 years, and then also paying the fees. So on my scale, I'm paying it's now £475 a year, just as a kind of fee for the admin of managing the organic certification and inspection and everything. So I have to be careful about what inputs I'm using. So any compost that I'm bringing in has to be approved. What seed I'm using. So my seed is organic seed, so it's been produced organically. And then obviously not applying any chemicals. There are some that are organic approved actually, but I choose not to use them.
Why is that?
Because I really believe in agroecology and a well-functioning ecosystem being the most resilient system that exists on the planet. And it's difficult because there's some things like slugs, for example. The most common question I get asked is, but what do you do about slugs? And it is really soul destroying when you spend all this time nurturing these little baby pak choys and then you put them in the ground and then the next day they're all gone because they all got eaten by slugs. And a lot of growers will put down slug pellets, which there are organically approved ones. But I don't trust that those things don't continue to exist within the system, and that any animal that eats the slugs that have consumed these slug pellets isn't going to be negatively affected by that. And also, by removing the slugs from the system, I also remove the animals that eat them. And so by leaving them, I'm building up the kind of predator population as well. So I'm trying to restore balance basically by not removing something. And that can be quite difficult with certain things like rodents, for example, because, you know, they can really multiply very fast. And so I have to manage that by basically not leaving them any food sources. So I had to actually relocate I grow microgreens. I had to move my pea shoots and sunflower shoots home and grow them at home because they would just eat them all. So the other thing with converting to organic is record keeping, basically. They just want you to really show, they want a record of when you sowed the seed, when you planted it, when you like if you fed it with anything. So I do use seaweed feed, and I make my own plant feeds as well from comfrey and nettle. And then they also want to know where you've sold it. So there's a lot of, I've got some very complicated spreadsheets basically, that track all of that.
The hidden world of organic farming, hey?
Yeah. So what they don't do is actually come and do tests. It's all about traceability and record keeping, and then inspection. Like they will come and look around and check you don't have any pesticides just in the corner. But I think it's probably different if you're a bigger operation. I think I'm quite low risk in terms of my likelihood to be non-compliant. But it is an interesting thing that farmers have to pay to be certified organic and prove that they're not using chemicals, rather than it being the other way around, that there's like some sort of like prove why you need to use these chemicals, or like organics become this thing that's seen as quite a premium, and only for the wealthy, whereas like it's been how we farmed for most of our lives, like most of human life. It just happens to be that we've now, like the reason that organic certification is so important is because it's a body of people who have been fighting to maintain a level of standards that are about not polluting the environment or using chemicals to grow our food. And that's been a lot of work, and it has been a fight to kind of maintain that. But it's also meant that organic is more expensive, and the way that you attract people into growing organically is to say you can get more money for this. So it's a complicated situation, and most small growers just can't afford to grow organically. So I guess with your question about how to support small growers, understanding that they might not be organically certified, but they're still very likely to be growing to organic standards is worthwhile.
I guess that answers the question of why more people don't do it. If it's just more expensive, a lot more work, and not always guaranteed to get the same yield if something comes in and
and you can't just spray something if something goes wrong, or in terms of farming is incredibly unpredictable, and you're working with the weather, and with climate change, things are becoming increasingly uncertain. So my first year we had a drought. We didn't have rain for 2 months. My second year it rained most of summer and all of winter. The way that I'm dealing with that is I'm just growing lots of different crops, knowing that some will work well some years and some won't, and accepting that. And I guess that's what I'll with veg bags, that's what I ask of my customers, is that they understand that some years they might not get certain things, and they have to eat seasonally as well, which is something we're really not used to. But it's a scary moment this year in our country because of how wet it's been and farmers not being able to get on their land for
There becomes this negative feedback loop, though, of there is changeable climate and adverse conditions for growing. But at the same time, we've been doing a form of farming for over 100 years that doesn't look after our very soil that we are growing in, which the health of the soil can have implications, and how we utilize nature and bring nature into our farming practices can actually benefit the climate on a more global scale. But what we've done is we've deforested land for centuries to make way for nice flat fields where we can grow one type of crop. And now we're at a point in our lives when we are living through the consequences of all that.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah.
Which is why it's so important that someone like yourself is doing farming the way it should be.
Yeah.
Working with nature.
Yeah.
Having a diverse range of crops.
Yeah. And it's very doable. Possibly not economically, but I think it's where we're going to go. I think it's where we're going to have to go eventually.
There's going to have to be some form of middle ground, right? Between what you can do on a small scale here in a market garden and then what your landowner can do on a bigger scale with all the fields that they have access to.
Yeah.
And is that in some way in line with where regenerative farming practices are? Because it's a way of kind of meeting in the middle between, let's say, an organic farm and a non-organic farm. It's having this compromise of the use of some chemicals. It's the use of bringing some form of nature in, but still having a mass scale and a mass yield.
So I guess regenerative has varying definitions. It's one of those kind of different people have different ideas. And I think they have kind of, so they have kind of 5 core principles, which I can't remember right now.
We touched on it in Anna's episode. She mentioned the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture, which are diversity, livestock integration, protect the soil surface, minimize soil disturbance, and then maintain living roots.
Right, yeah. So I think organic doesn't necessarily mean not like big scale. You do still get very big scale organic farms that are farming using big tractors and monocrops, fields of carrots, fields of organic wheat. It's not necessarily that all organic places are my scale. With regenerative, the focus is really on how do we regenerate the soil that has become so depleted from our conventional practices. So it's all of those things. It's like having the living roots in the soil. I don't think all regenerative farmers bring in livestock, but many do bring in animals to kind of graze off weeds and crops, and add fertility back into the soil in a kind of passive way rather than putting on chemical fertilizers. But I think it is more an ethos as well. So it's like an approach to farming where you are thinking about the future resilience of your farm and you're regenerating it, you're bringing back nature, you're improving things. And it's kind of a word that farmers can use to describe a practice where they are doing, like, bringing those things back, without having to pay for the fees of being organic, for example, or do all of the paperwork, or, you know, be kind of adhere to very strict rules. And what's really exciting about it is that it's really growing as a movement. And also that farmers are showing that they can still maintain high yields by doing this, because there's a fear that if you stop using the chemicals, then you won't have as high yields. And that falls back to cost, because a farmer obviously wants to make the most money that they can from their land. And currently it's very difficult to make much money from land. So one of the amazing things that I found out the other day when I went to visit another similar market garden to mine, Eves Hill in Norfolk, they produced £40,000 worth of produce on 1 acre. I asked Tom, the farmer here, how much you could get from an acre arable, and he didn't actually say, but he did say you can get £10,000 an acre from solar farms. And as I understand it, it's about between 250 to 500 pounds an acre for an arable farm. So like the level of productivity that you can get from growing on a small scale is massive. And also you get all of the added benefits of like more people on the land, more connection with nature, like better community resilience, and just generally a space for community to come together. So it's, in terms of like what the future looks like, I would hope that there's a lot more of things happening on this scale, but we do still have to have some slightly bigger scale things to produce things like potatoes or beans, dried beans.
What do you hope to see happen here on this land in the next few years? Are you going to expand into the rest of the acreage, which has not currently got any kind of crops on?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of space that we haven't started growing vegetables on yet. I think this year I'm hoping to sow sunflowers and have a sunflower maze at the end of the field. Sunflowers are really good for restoring soil. But also it's going to be beautiful, and I'll hopefully be able to invite people to come here and connect with the land a bit. I think would
the seeds be an edible source of food as well?
Yeah. I mean, probably it's like not really economically viable to harvest sunflower seeds on a small scale. But for birds, it's a really good source of food. And I might sell some of the flowers. But it's more about using that land and restoring it so that I can then scale. I'm just slowly scaling, kind of at the rate that I can, with the amount of labour that I've got. In the medium to long term, I really want to become a place where people can come and learn these skills, because my journey was quite complex to learn how to be a market gardener, and there's very little formal training in the country for how to gain these skills. So I'd really like to offer people paid traineeships or apprenticeships, and kind of find a way to connect people to more land, because actually through my landlord, I have met other people with land who would like growers on their land. So I'd love to help connect people that way, but also support them with the skills and the resources that are needed, because it's a pretty massive undertaking, especially as someone coming into it with no knowledge. And all of my knowledge has been gained from what little bits I can get from people and from books and podcasts and things like that. And there are some people doing kind of comprehensive training, but I'd love to offer that as well.
Okay. You're kind of minimal dig type garden here as well. So explain kind of what that is and why you do it.
There's kind of a movement called no dig gardening, which is you basically imitate a soil forest floor. So instead of trying to like mix in compost with soil and till the soil, which can cause quite a lot of damage because it breaks up the soil structure and biology, you just place cardboard to suppress any weeds on the soil and then put compost on top, quite a thick layer of compost, and the cardboard will slowly break down and then the compost will feed the soil. And I can't really do that on this scale because I don't have a very easily available source of compost. And I didn't want to use the council compost because that I don't know what went into that, because it's made from just garden waste.
It's not organic,
So instead of doing that, and partly because my land is quite compacted clay, I do something in between where I use a broad fork to lift the soil without inverting it. So I'm reducing the compaction and adding air into the soil.
I've seen a picture of this. The broad fork has kind of got really, really long kind of teeth that kind of dig about a foot or two into the ground, and you're just kind of slightly moving it, I suppose.
Yeah, just really, really gently lift the soil just to kind of, break up any compaction and aerate the soil as well, because you do really want aerobic soil for healthy kind of soil biology for growing plants. And when soil gets really compacted, for example, if you drive on it a lot or even walk on it a lot, so we don't walk on our veg beds here. We have defined paths that we stick to because we're trying not to compact the soil where the vegetables are growing. And then we do add compost to the top after that because we're trying to build the organic matter in the soil. And then, so I'm trying not to chop the soil at all or flip it over while still improving it because it is quite compacted. And that's kind of, I went on this compost workshop recently and he said the broad fork was the best way to get the biology back into your soil. So I felt very validated in that approach.
How hard has it been working with hardcore clay?
It's pretty full on. It is, yeah. I'm really lucky that the past 2 farms that I worked in were both clay as well. Barkham, I didn't get a lot of experience with the actual cultivation because I was mostly harvesting. Peapod, I was using a rotivator, and I very quickly learned that you should not rotivate with very wet clay because it basically just makes it go solid. It just turns into like a brick. The clay, if it dries out on the surface, it cracks. You kind of have to get exactly the right humidity in it to get it to work. On the flip side of that, clay has the most nutrients and minerals of any soil. So if you can get it to work for you, it's very good.
Right, so it's all there. It's just getting access to it.
How you unlock it, and how you unlock it is you add organic matter. So I'm also doing things like mulching with straw, which the farmer baled some of his straw from his heritage wheat for me, and things like that, just to kind of really stop the surface from baking, and which when it bakes like that, then the water can't get in. So it's like, how do you stop that? You put mulch on top, and then that protects the soil surface. But it's been a journey, and I still have a way to go, I think, in improving it. But we do see the places where we've been growing already function much better than the places we haven't.
So talk me through what you grow here. What is working, what you're enjoying growing. There's certainly a lot of seedlings around us sprouting.
Yes, this is the really busy time of year for seedlings. So my focus is salad.
Okay.
Which is in part, I think, actually just because I love eating salad. I'm always the person who brings a salad. But also it's a high value crop. So and it's quite quick to grow
in terms of you're selling it by weight, I suppose. Yeah and it's quite a lightweight.
And it's also, if you're trying to supply people direct, salad is the thing that is the best when it's locally grown, because most of the stuff you get in the supermarket has probably been on the shelf for a few weeks, or at least in transport and then on the shelf before it gets to your house. And they get around that by putting nitrogen gas in the bags, but which keeps it fresh until you open the bag. And then as soon as you open the bag, the oxygen gets in and the salad starts to deteriorate.
It starts to show its age.
Which is why you get that black sludginess in salad.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's fresh,
and again, that's such an exhaustive process as well of bringing in extra resources to keep your salad fresh.
Yeah, packaging it and all of that. And I do have to package my salads because I have to keep them fresh as well. But they will last for like well over a week in the fridge. And you can keep dipping in and out of the bag. So yeah, salads and salad vegetables. So like cucumbers, courgettes, tomatoes, things like that.
All grown in your polytunnel, those?
Yeah, cucumbers I can grow outside, and courgettes actually. So it's mostly tomatoes inside, and some cucumbers. And then this year, peppers and aubergines as well, because I've got the second polytunnel. And then greens, so kale, chard, spinach. That's mostly what you see here. I'm growing flowers for my friend's wedding this year. So there's quite a lot of flower seedlings. That's mostly fun and wanting, like, it's a nice wedding gift.
Yeah, great way to experiment. Good reason to experiment as well.
Yeah, exactly.
What can be possible? Yeah,
it's learning for me. I do sell edible flowers as well. I put edible flowers in salads just because they're really colourful, herbs, things like that. So yeah, all the things that are really fun to eat. Or beetroot, radishes.
Always a hardy grower, right? Beetroot.
Yeah, beetroot is amazing. It's my favourite thing to grow because you kind of just put it in the ground and then you get a beetroot. It's amazing. And so much nicer fresh. Like, it's kind of amazing to me how most people go all their life just eating the kind of like stored beetroot.
Yeah, boiled in a bag. Yeah,
and like
it just tastes nothing like what a beetroot should taste like.
I know. Yeah, so earthy and like.
They're remarkably healthy for us as well, and what they can do to our blood as well is remarkable. It's apparently like beetroots is like a legal form of doping in sport in what it does in raising like your ability for the blood to take in more oxygen.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
A lot of people try and a couple of hours before a race will just eat a beetroot or beetroot juice or something like that. Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah,
there you go, a bit of marginal gains for you next time.
Yeah.
And what's on the cards? What do you hope to be growing? What do you envisage seeing?
I'd love to bring in more perennials. So like artichokes, rhubarb, berries, like soft fruits. I think with that, I'll do a pick your own element of a CSA. So CSA is community supported agriculture. So this year, I've actually just been accepted onto an incubator, like mentorship scheme to set up a CSA, which I'm really looking forward to. And hopefully I'll get some help with the kind of business side of things and financial forecasting and all of those very glamorous things. But yeah, I'd love for people who are kind of members of the farm and get a veg box.
So they kind of pay in, I guess.
Yeah. So usually you commit to getting, like, to supporting the farmer throughout the year. So whether that looks like an upfront payment and then getting a weekly share of the harvest, or still paying monthly, but just kind of committing to getting it for the whole season. It just means that a farmer can predict what their income's going to be and therefore work out what they can produce. And get staff in, because like my expenditure is really high at this time of year, but my income is very low, which is not kind of the standard for most businesses. Most businesses have some level of consistency in their turnover. So with community supported agriculture, you're asking your community to buy into supporting the farm, and also to some extent share in the risks of it. So it might be that if you have a crop failure, then they accept that they're not going to get as much as they initially might have. But then if you have an abundance, then they share in that as well. So they get the rewards and also share some of the risk. So yeah, I've been a bit hesitant about that because I'm a perfectionist and I would want everyone to get a really nice thing that I was proud of and cater to people's wants. But I think I've kind of accepted that that's not necessarily what I can achieve, but I can still ask people, like, I can be like, this is what you get. And then the people who choose to buy into that are the people who accept that that's what they get. But yeah, so I'd have pick your own flowers as part of that, and pick your own berries, so people can come to the farm. And because the reason for that is it's very labor intensive picking soft fruits. And it doesn't make sense economically to be doing it to sell them. And the same with like beans. Beans are like, you have to hand pick them all. They take a long time. They're very fiddly, but then the cost of beans is actually pretty low. Although I did grow them last year, so yeah.
Okay, I want to close things with something that you wrote, which I read whilst researching you, which I thought this was a really nice way to end things. It was from your socials when I was diving deep into you. You said, there is nothing quite like the feeling of digging up a bed full of perfect carrots, or coming back to the courgette plant the next day to find more oversized fruit that appeared from nowhere overnight. Of course, there are occasional pests, diseases and crop failures, but again and again, vegetables give me a sense of abundance. They surprise me with their unusual shapes and deviations, their resilience, their beauty, and they taste absolutely delicious.
That's really sweet. I don't remember writing that.
I think this was many years ago, actually, as I was diving really deep into your history of traveling around the world. But I loved it. I thought it was just a great way to sum up exactly why we're here and what you're doing.
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing your harvest later this year, and what things will be grow, what magical wonders you can create.
Thank you.
And look forward to following the continuing evolution of this plot of land and what exciting things will come.
Yeah, I feel like I've arrived, actually. Like 2 years in, I know what I am doing. I'm a bit less lost. So I think lots of good things are going to come.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to find out more information about any of the guests, please check out the show notes, where you will also find links to things mentioned in the conversations. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a look through the past recordings. There's so many more incredible stories for you to find, and I can't wait for you to enjoy them. Thank you.